At our national conference on Christian Apologetics a few years ago, just I think 2 or 3 years ago, Dr. Richard Howe, who I'm sure many of you are familiar with, debated professing Christian music minister turned atheist Dan Barker. Barker is the co-president of the Freedom From Religion Foundation. You may have heard about them on the news and their various lawsuits that they like to bring against Christians and local governments and those kind of things. But after the debate, two of our SES Ph.D. alumni decided to begin a book project to dive more deeply into answering the many claims and assertions that Barker promoted during the debate with Dr. Howe. And the result is a relatively new book entitled Answering the Music Man, Dan Barker's Arguments Against Christianity. So we'll be discussing the contents of this book with a few of the authors this week and next week. The book has multiple authors, and we'll get into as much of it as we can on Why Do You Believe? I'm Adam Tucker with Southern Evangelical Seminary, and this is Why Do You Believe? Well, welcome back to another episode of Why Do You Believe, the official podcast and live stream of Southern Evangelical Seminary and Bible College. Hope you're enjoying the weekly content. It is a challenge, but by God's grace, I think we've only missed a week or two so far this year. So we appreciate your prayers for the continued efforts to bring this content to you each week. And I hope you will be sure to check out last week's episode with Aaron Marshall from Ratio Christi as we discuss the importance of reaching the university for Christ. And as always, I would encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube channel, like this video, click the notifications so you know when we go live, like our Facebook page, so you know what's going on. You can check out the archived episodes, and you can also visit ses.edu to download our mobile app that has all of our podcasts. We use the audio from these live streams as our podcast material. And it also has over 500 hours of content, mostly from our National Conference on Christian Apologetics, completely for free. So tons and tons of apologetics-related content. And you can find that by clicking on the media link at ses.edu. So this is, admittedly, my first episode with multiple guests. So we're going to pray that the software does what it's supposed to do and everything goes smoothly. So I'm going to bring our guests in for today. We have doctors Kyle Keltz and Trisha Scribner with us today. John Farrar, unfortunately, hopefully he may still join, but they've had some health-related issues in their family, and he wasn't able to be with us today, so please keep he and his family in your prayers. And if he's able to join later, then we'll pop him in there and we'll continue the conversation. But we have Doctors Kyle Keltz and Trisha Scribner, both SES alumni, both with their PhDs, as a matter of fact, from SES, which is pretty cool. So, guys, it's great to have you on the show today.
Thank you, Adam. It's great to be here.
Thank you.
So let's let our audience know a little bit about each of you. I don't have prepared bios or anything for you, so we'll let ladies go first here. Trisha, if you don't mind, give us just a brief intro as to who you are, what you're working on, and those kind of things.
Yes, thank you, Adam, for inviting us to come and talk with the folks today. I'm really excited about that. I am a recent graduate with my PhD at SES, so I don't know what I'm doing yet with the rest of life. I'm so disoriented right now from not having to work on a dissertation for the past year and a half that I am sort of navigating that course very carefully. I am a nana to 10, and so I'm spending time with my grandchildren. I'm reading some books, as I told you, that I haven't gotten to read for about 14 years of schooling because I had assigned reading and I didn't know what it was like to read something because I enjoyed it. I am teaching some classes. I went to Jacksonville, Florida, and taught a series as part of a series Beyond the Basics with the new ministry team I'm part of. And then I'm doing some blogging and just trying to get my footing as far as next steps, which one of them is, being interviewed by you and other folks who want to talk about topics that I'm interested in. My dissertation was on the impossibility of theistic evolution from a Thomistic, that is, in Aquinas's view of what reality is, the impossibility of theistic kind of evolution. And I hope to be writing more on that at a popular level. And I hope to have some of that on crossexamined.org, Frank Turek's website, so folks can go there in the next few months and find hopefully some posts on the issue regarding theistic evolution. I've been married for 46 years in July to Randy, and we live in Harrisburg, North Carolina. I trusted the Lord as a little kid, and he has been faithful and wonderful and merciful to me all my life. I'm so thankful to be able to be part of his kingdom work.
That's awesome. Thank you for joining us, and really do want to read your dissertation. I think that is a fascinating topic, especially when it comes to Thomism, given that it's by and large held in the Catholic Church, the philosophy, and most of the Catholic scholars I hear have no issue, at least in my understanding, at all with Darwinian type of evolution. So I'm very interested in the topic. So thank you for all the work you put into that, and I look forward to see what God's going to do through you with that information in the years to come. So, Kyle Keltz, tell us about yourself, sir.
All right. Yeah. So I started out at SES, getting the master's degree in apologetics. I remember at the time I was thinking about going and getting a PhD in philosophy, but I didn't want to. I wanted to learn philosophy grounded in the Bible. And at the time, I wasn't all that much into Thomism. I wasn't familiar with it that much. Well, anyways, as Eric Gustafson would say, I drank the Kool-Aid. And anyways, I graduated from SES with the master's degree in apologetics, decided to stay, got the PhD in philosophy of religion. That was 2 years ago, I think, summer 2019. I did my dissertation on the problem of animal suffering, different formulation of the problem of evil. And, but yeah, ever since I started the PhD program, I've been teaching philosophy at South Plains College. I live in Lubbock, Texas, home of the Texas Tech Red Raiders. And outside of Lubbock is a town called Levelland, where we have a community college called South Plains College. And I've been teaching intro philosophy, intro to world religions, and English composition out at South Plains, and I've been loving it, been enjoying teaching, and yeah, that's what I've been doing. And this book that we're going to talk about today was just one of the projects that I'd kind of accumulated, and we finally put it together after I graduated. So
awesome, and we're going to have Kyle back on in a couple of weeks to talk about the problem of animal suffering as it relates specifically to atheist formulations of the problem of evil and those sorts of things. So be on the lookout for that. I think John may try to join us shortly, and if he does, we'll do our best to get him added on. But let's go ahead and jump in to the topic at hand. So I only have the digital copy. I will admit I am very much a ebook person as much as possible. So, but Trisha, I think you have a physical copy in your hand. So if you want to hold that up, but the book is entitled "Answering the Music Man." As I said recently, it's responding to the atheistic claims of Dan Barker. Thank you, Trisha. And if you don't, again, know anything about Dan Barker, he's a former professing Christian music minister of sorts for many decades. You've probably heard some of his music, actually, if you traffic in the area of church musicals, cantatas, and those kind of things. But became an atheist, now is the co-president of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, as I said at the beginning. So guys, both of you were the editors of this project, many authors, and you both wrote in the book as well. But what was the impetus really behind starting this type of project? and either one of you can just jump in, or both.
Oh, well, it was pretty much what you said, Adam. It started at the 2017 conference. SES's national, let's see, what's it called? I forget. National Conference on Christian Apologetics. Yep. And that year it was the main, what do you call it?
The main event.
Yeah,
it was the Friday night session. Yeah.
Yeah. One of the main events was a debate between Dr. Richard Howe and Dan Barker. And I remember at the time, so I hadn't read any of Dan Barker's books. I had heard of them. And so I went into the debate and we were all, Trisha and I were both PhD students at the time. We went into the debate. I went into the debate thinking it was going to be a good one. And, well, yeah, you were there, and Dan Barker, Richard Howe gave his piece, Dan Barker gave his, so they did some back and forth. And I just didn't realize how badly formulated all of Dan Barker's arguments were. I mean, they were more like assertions. Mm-hmm. They seemed like more like assertions to me than actual arguments. And he also didn't understand what Dr. Howe was talking about. I mean, Dr. Howe went into one of the more complicated arguments from Aquinas. But anyways, I was just surprised at how little he seemed to know. It was like he was making straw man arguments. He's arguing against something that none of us really believed in anyways. Mm-hmm. But one of the things was that after the debate was over, we went out into, everybody was coming out of the auditorium, and I just heard people talking about how they thought that Dan Barker maybe did better than Dr. Howe did. And it just, that kind of floored me also, was that they, because he's a great speaker. He was a preacher for 20 something years. Now he's co-founded Freedom from Religion Foundation. He's always been on TV. He's always been talking, whether he's preaching from a young age or whatever. He's a great speaker. So I just, after that, I just really thought that it would be great to try to get it out there even more, and just expose his arguments. I mean, it's fine, if he wants to be an atheist, that's fine. I just, when he travels around the country saying that Christianity is false and putting himself up there like he's some authority figure because he used to be a preacher, I just thought that was kind of terrible. And I just wanted to, one of the main reasons behind making this project was so that we could show what he's saying, show that it doesn't really have anything to do with Orthodox Christianity, and then just kind of expose that and say, look, I mean, he's arguing against this, but that's not what any of us believe anyway. So that was one of the major things. Did you have anything to add, Trisha?
Yes, I will just echo you though, Kyle. What troubled me the most about the whole debate was the response of the audience. Like you, I was surprised, and I was also disappointed, because it seemed to me that we are speaking before an audience of people who are at least interested in apologetics, which has some philosophical underpinnings. And I guess I expected them not to seek the one-liners, the memes and the zingers, but they didn't seem at large to be satisfied with the longer, more detailed arguments. And of course, in a debate, you're limited on time. So I actually saw a woman confront Dr. Howe in the lobby, and I wasn't privy to the conversation, but it looked like a difficult one. And it just concerned me that he needed more time to flesh out the whole rationale, but just to see the audience not willing to even go there made me realize what a need there is for us to help people to dig in and understand that some of these issues are nuanced in terms of how we respond to them. And they may require as much digging as we dig when we're trying to figure out how to work our new remote system. And every Christian is willing to do that. And so we need to be willing to dig in a little bit and read some of the background stuff. And just because we don't understand an argument doesn't mean it isn't true. It may be a lack of our understanding. And if this is the highest level that we're willing to think is that audience that was there that night, and the way that we respond and what we expected in terms of the debate, then we have some growing that I think that we need to do. And that's what this book sought to do. Because again, it's not necessarily the audience's fault that you can't flesh out some of these more nuanced aspects of the Thomistic way of thinking about the nature of reality. And so the book itself can give them the opportunity to dig into that and seek to learn the reasoning behind it that undergirds Richard Howe's arguments, which are always quite insightful.
Yeah, I agree 100%. As the person who set up that debate, I was extremely frustrated with not obviously everybody in the audience, but certainly some of the responses that I heard as well. And I guess I expected more out of the audience that attends the national conference typically.
Yeah.
And my two thoughts were, okay, you didn't understand exactly the argument Dr. Howe was giving or whatever the case may be, but I thought that was the point of coming to an event that is an educational event so that you learn new things you don't already know. And secondly, the despair almost from some people I heard that Barker gave so many assertions, Kyle, as you were saying, just throwing out assertions left and right, and being angry at Dr. Howe for not attempting to answer every single one of those that had nothing to do with the debate at all. And they were just distraught that, there were these assertions against Christianity that we apparently weren't able to answer. No, it's just a debate tactic. It had nothing to do with the topic at hand, and Dr. Howe would have got nothing accomplished had he tried to take the bait and answer every single one of those. So actually, just self-promotion, I guess, but really promotion for the school. I wrote a blog after that on our SES.edu blog called "Are You Thinking Like an Atheist?" and responding to some of these charges that were leveled against Dr. Howe, because I thought he did great personally in the context of what the debate was supposed to have been about. He did an amazing job, but Barker, tried to steer it in another direction. So, John's trying to get on, but I can't do two things at once, so I apologize. But hopefully we'll make it work. If not, we'll get him another time. But so you've touched on this a little bit as far as the goals for the book being to, I think, specifically help Christians dive a little deeper into these somewhat more complex issues. So since we've really already answered that question, why do you think it is so? Well, here's an example before I ask that question. So I ran into an elderly lady the next day at the conference in the hallway with her husband and a couple of friends, and just overheard them saying they should have had somebody like William Lane Craig in, who knows what he's talking about, to debate Dan Barker. And of course, we would disagree with Dr. Craig on quite a few things, as we've talked about on this show before. But I was floored that, in her mind at least, and maybe she does, I don't know the lady, she may be a physicist for all I know, but in her mind at least, she believes and understands that Dr. Craig is an authority on the Kalam or whatever arguments for God's existence she's used to hearing, and apparently thinks she understands all of those, but she didn't grasp the more philosophical side that Dr. Howe was getting at. Where do you think the breakdown is happening? What's going on here with and this is supposed to be the intellectual side of the church who presumably is interested in these topics and comes to conferences like ours. So where's the breakdown happening? What's going on?
Well, I think we, as a Christian body of believers, let's just say in America at least, we are not accustomed to having to work at thinking about God. And we have accepted some apologetics information for those who are interested in apologetics and understand it as a systematic defense of the faith. We have accepted and delved into some of the more common, popular arguments. But what we haven't done is delve into and sought to understand the views on the nature of reality that undergird those arguments. And so, with the lady you're talking about and the ones that I saw, I suspect they assume because they can't understand the argument, it's not a good argument. And so, I feel, as people who've given our career to this, that it's our job to invite them to come a little deeper in understanding this, but it's our job to bridge that gap. And maybe this is revealing not just a problem with the audience, but a gap that we have allowed as academics in bridging the gap for the Christian whose specialty is not philosophy. And so this book is a first attempt at that. Richard Howe's chapter is probably much more of a deep dive philosophically than anything else, but you could read a lot of the other chapters and get the next level before you got to Richard's chapter, which is probably the deepest and most focused. But the arguments are, in my opinion, many of these arguments are virtually unassailable. In other words, when Aquinas talks about the metaphysical necessity of God, as Ed Fazer has said, you get to the point in some of this reasoning where God cannot not exist. It's not a matter of did we give the strongest scientific argument, because these are philosophical arguments, the answer to which is conclusive. I believe, at least on the notion of the purpose-driven life that Barker talks about in my chapter, which is drawn from Aquinas' what is called his 5 ways. And so I believe that these are extremely strong arguments, but we often share the weaker scientific arguments because they are easier to grasp. And so we've got some work to do, don't we? In bridging, Kyle, I think you can speak on this, bridging this gap. And it is our responsibility to do this. And so I'm taking on part of the blame and responsibility that we've got to do more work. We got to call Christians to be willing to study and delve into these topics and struggle with not understanding, while not at the same time assuming because they can't yet understand it, that they will never understand it, or that because they can't, it must not be the best argument. They are the best arguments. They're just far more nuanced than some of the other ones that we've offered.
Mm-hmm. Any other thoughts on that, Kyle?
Yeah, I'm not sure. That's honestly, I feel like that's a tough question. One thing that came to my mind is, which kind of has to do with one of the issues I wrote about in the book, was having maybe trying to do a better job of educating young Christians, new Christians, on what the relationship between faith and reason are. I hear people talk about, well, my faith this, my faith that. When I talk to people, whether I'm doing apologetics, evangelism, or just talking to someone who's struggling with their faith, I hear the word faith used so many ways. I have to stop people and say, when you say, my faith that I lost, or my faith this, my faith that, I say, what do you mean by that? And sometimes I hear people say, oh, well, faith is, it means I believe that God exists, or there's you'll hear 20 different definitions. And I know it was really helpful for me when I learned not only Aquinas' view on faith and reason, but all these other different views of faith and reason that Christians have held throughout the centuries, that if you understand what faith and reason are, you can realize that science, philosophy, these aren't enemies of faith. You can use these as tools to strengthen your faith. So if you come across something, I'll admit the de ente argument from Aquinas that Richard Howe used that night. It's not, if you're new to it, you've got some work to do to understand it. But that's one thing. If I know that the Kalam has strengthened my faith because it has the idea that God exists is no longer an article of faith for me. Like I've seen it demonstrated through the Kalam or something like that. Well, now I get to the De Ente argument, and it might seem really tough to understand, but if I realize that other philosophical arguments can strengthen my faith, then why not try to dive into something that's a little more harder to understand? But like we would argue, like arguments like the De Ente argument are even stronger, and you can even pull more of God's attributes out of the conclusions of these arguments than you can something like the Kalam. So I'm not sure. For me as a philosopher, I realize that, when I go to church, not everybody's asking the questions I'm asking. So sometimes I just wonder, well, maybe I'm just different from everybody else. So sometimes I think that's it. But yeah, I worry about people when I worry what people think faith and reason are, because, sometimes people, we might talk about this here in a second, especially what Dan Barker admits what he thought faith was. So
yeah, I do want to get into that, and that's a good segue. But I love before we move on to that, I love how Ed Fazer says it isn't arguing for God's existence that's difficult; it's wading through the mounds of intellectual rubbish to get people to understand the arguments for God's existence that's difficult. Because so many of these concepts and things that we like to talk about at SES used to just be the normal way of talking about God and his attributes and these concepts, but we have so much to overcome now just in the way of bad thinking to give people that baseline again from which to reason about these things that it can be really difficult as we experienced. But Kyle, let's jump into what you were talking about, because one of your chapters is about the relationship between faith and reason, and this is one of my favorite topics just personally. Because as you said, it is so misunderstood in the church. So how is Barker understanding what he thinks faith entails?
Yeah, and this is this goes into another one of the big reasons why we wanted to write the book. So in the book, we were focusing on some of the things he says in his debates. Most of the book tries to answer his objections to Christianity in his book. It's called Godless: How an Evangelical Preacher Became One of America's Leading Atheists. So, in the book, he actually tells his story. He tells about his life, how he preached and was an evangelist and did music for about 20 years in Christian circles. But he puts himself out as, I was this pastor, I was this preacher for over 20 years. And I'm this evangelical pastor, and now I'm one of America's leading atheists. So honestly, I thought it was a little deceptive because whenever I personally think that I think he was a Christian, the way he explains it. I just don't think he ever dug deep into the theology and into the philosophy as he should. Mm-hmm. And you can kind of see, if you ever read his book, you can kind of see him answer some of those things, or talk about some of those things. But yeah, when he gets to this part in his book, Godless, on faith and reason, he let's see, I have a quote. He says, I'll read the whole quote. Like the lonely heart who keeps waiting for the phone to ring, I kept trusting that God would someday come through. He never did. The only proposed answer was faith, and I gradually grew to dislike the smell of that word. I finally realized that faith is a cop-out, a defeat, an admission that the truths of religion are unknowable through evidence and reason. And later on in the book, he says, religious faith is not adjustable. It remains strong in spite of a lack of evidence or in spite of contrary evidence. So Dan Barker in this book, putting himself out there as some evangelical leader, is saying that faith is a cop-out, and faith is something that you have in spite of evidence or contrary to evidence. And that's just one thing that blows me away. He went to a Bible college for 4 years. In the book, he admits that he wasn't that into it because he knew that Christianity was true. He didn't really feel like he needed to mess with evidences or learning theology that much. So, I mean, he admits that he didn't get that deep into it. But when he says that faith is just believing something despite the evidence, that blows me away, because, and this is what when I talk on the issue, I just point out that his claim, I mean, that's fine if he wants to say that faith is believing despite the evidence. That's fine if that's what he personally believes. But that's not what Christians believe, or at least that's not been the orthodox or the classical position on faith and reason throughout the history of Christianity. I mean, if you just Google faith and Christianity, faith and reason, you could probably debunk his statement in like 2 seconds. I mean, because we have views on faith and reason. There's a book, if you get on Amazon, there's a book called Faith and Reason, 3 Views. It's one of those debate books, and it has 3 Christian views on what faith and reason are. So yeah, in my chapter, I just point out that Dan Barker's wrong. I mean, he can define faith however he wants personally, but Christians have been talking about the relationship between faith and reason for centuries. I mean, we've got views on faith and reason going as far back as Tertullian, in the 2nd and 3rd century, Augustine, and then of course in the chapter I go over faith and reason is talked about by Thomas Aquinas at the medieval period. But Christians have had fully hashed out views of what faith and reason are for thousands of years. And when Dan Barker comes out as an authority figure and says that faith is believing something, although you know it to be false, that's just completely misleading.
I love his humility.
Of the big reasons why.
I love his humility in his book title. One of the world's leading atheists. Of course, the publisher may have done that. He may not have done that, but just having a little fun. But so what is a good, I guess, in a nutshell, for your everyday Christian at the debate or sitting in the church pew? What is a good everyday definition of what faith actually is, biblically speaking?
Okay, yeah, and I hope I don't say anything. I mean, stop me if I say something wrong, but I mean, what I usually tell people, faith is believing something that like you haven't been able to sit down and see that it's true for yourself through evidence or some other means. So something that you're not sure if it's true or not, but you believe it's true on the basis of some authority, right? I mean, that's basically what Thomas Aquinas says. He says faith is believing a proposition on the basis of some authority. So like you're not able to demonstrate the truth of this proposition, but you are taking it on some authority that is true. And then, so yeah, and I talk about all this in my chapter, but one of my most favorite things that Aquinas talks about is how he breaks down when he's talking about because he talks about the act of faith, the object of faith, the act of reason, the object of reason. When he talks about the objects of reason, he makes this distinction between truths of faith only, truths of both faith and reason, and truths of reason only. And a truth of reason would be something that doesn't really have anything to do with the truth of Christianity or something theological. So it would be something like the atomic weight of oxygen. That would be a truth of reason only. When you start getting into religion and Christianity and all this, he talks about truths of faith and reason. So that would, for Aquinas, that would be something like God's existence or some of God's attributes. And he calls these truths of faith and reason because some people can take God's existence by faith. They can say, well, I'm not sure. I haven't seen the evidence, but I think God exists. But if you use philosophy, you can show that God exists. You can prove it to somebody. If they're willing to sit down and look at all the evidence. Mm-hmm. So, but once you've demonstrated the truth of something, it's no longer a proposition of faith for you because you know it's true through reason. So he argues that things like God's existence, God's attributes, other things like that can be truths of faith and reason. And then he's got his category of truths of faith only. Truths of faith only are things that the Bible talks about that we think that God has revealed to humanity, but we can't use philosophy to prove that these things must be true.
Mm-hmm.
And Aquinas would say that these are things like, the Trinity, that God is triune, that the fact that Jesus is going to raise us all from the dead at the end of days. There's no philosophical argument you can use to prove that these things must be the case. But since we know that God exists, like if you got the apologetics degree at SES, you'd learn all these truths of faith and reason. So you'd learn all the arguments for God's existence, all the evidence for the reliability of the Bible, and all the evidence for Jesus' resurrection. Since I can use history, philosophy, and science to show that these things are true, that builds my faith. It makes it God's revelation to humanity even stronger, so that my faith in those things that I can't prove becomes even stronger. But yeah, I mean, Dan Barker says, "Oh, well, faith is believing something to the contrary to evidence," and then I just want to tell people that he doesn't know what he's talking about.
Mm-hmm.
If he thinks that's what the Christian definition of faith is, then he's just wrong. And we've had fully hashed out views of faith and reason for centuries. So,
mm-hmm. I think I got this example from our mutual friend Blake Anderson years and years ago, and I use it all the time when I'm talking about this issue. Just again for our listeners or for our viewers, I just think it's a good object lesson to explain exactly what you just said, and that's the notion of a doctor. You go, if somebody on the street comes up to you and says, you're going to die in the next 30 minutes if you don't take this pill, you'd probably be an idiot to say, okay, thank you. Do you have a glass of water? You don't know who this person is. You don't know what the pill is. You have no reason to think that what they're telling you is true. But if you'd been to the doctor and just had a battery of tests done to you, and your doctor runs up to you and says, we got the results of your test, you need to take this pill right now or you're going to die. You may want a second opinion. You may have some questions, but your reaction is going to be different, presumably, because he's your doctor, because he's an authority on matters that deal with your health, and you have reason to trust that what he's telling you is true, even though you can't see it and don't understand it and all those sorts of things. So for me, at least, that's a helpful illustration of the relationship between faith and reason being two sides of the same coin, pointing in the same direction. So I think that's an important work that you're doing specifically in this chapter. And it floors me that we have to answer this question over and over and over and over and over again for people in the pews and for unbelievers who think that this is what faith entails. It's mind-numbing.
And it really worries me. A part of my story too, though, is that I was an atheist for a few years out of high school, and I had all these questions about Christianity, and I wasn't ever, now after going to school, it's amazing how many books there really were out there during this time in my life. But all these people that I did know and I did ask these questions about, they didn't really have the answers. And I've ran into students in my teaching. I just teach intro to philosophy, and I don't preach to anybody during class, but people do ask me questions after class, and I share my opinions on things. And I've heard so many times people say, none of my pastors know the answers to these questions. I just think it's all, you just have to take it all in faith or nothing at all. So yeah, I just think, it's just one of those things. It's just kind of like SES's mission. We just need to be out there letting people know that there are books, there are resources, there are classes you can take that show you, because the evidence for Christianity has been there since day one.
Yeah.
And all these, whether it's God's existence, Jesus' resurrection, we have evidence for it. We have well-reasoned arguments for it, and it's out there. And it just kills me when, because people will say, well, I just don't think Christianity is true. Like, I've asked all these pastors, or I've asked so-and-so this and so-and-so that, and they weren't able to answer my questions, or they didn't even, or what's worse is when they'll say, oh, well, you shouldn't be asking questions like that. But what I want to tell people is like, look, if I had a question about science, okay, and it was a deep question, something that I thought was probably really hard to answer, and I just went and talked to like my junior high science teacher, and he or she didn't have the answer to it, I wouldn't think that all of science is bunk because of that.
That's a great
I would assume that I
illustration.
need to go talk to a scientist who specializes in that, So anyways, I'm sorry. I feel like I'm just going off on a different topic.
No. That's a great illustration. And again, for our listeners, we are talking to the Kyle Keltz and Trisha Scribner, the editors of Answering the Music Man, a relatively new book on answering Dan Barker's brand of atheism, shall we say, kind of the new atheism kind of mentality. So, Trisha, let's bring you in here because you close out the book and with perhaps the most important chapter of the book, called "Finding Purpose on the Journey to Nowhere." So, what is the purpose? Yes, I did that intentionally of this chapter. What's your goal there for this chapter?
Well, I want to show that Dan Barker, for one thing, misconstrues the very meaning of purpose, or he gives it a largely subjective experiential definition. He does concede that purpose exists objectively. That is, we all living things work toward a purpose. So he concedes that, but he says the purpose is to survive and gives evolution as the account or explanation of why that purpose exists. And then the second thing, as I said, is he treats purpose as you can have purpose in your life without having purpose of your life, the objective reality. I'm arguing no. What we're saying is there is an objective reality of all natural bodies, all the universe and everything in the universe that exhibits a purposeness, a purposefulness or directedness in the things that they do. And these are towards self-flourishing or toward the best case scenario for self-flourishing. But that cannot be fully explained for evolution because it's a directedness toward a specific end and it's patterned. In other words, we recognize the pattern or the types of flourishing vary with the kinds of beings things are. And so this purposiveness or purposefulness of things has to have an explanation. If something is directed, it must be directed from outside itself. And we say, well, wait a minute. Human beings are conscious and they can purpose to walk over to the door. We agree, yeah. But when you get to the very matrix of that, when I think that I want to walk to the door, there are a whole host of non-conscious events that occur at the neurological, all the way down to the atomic and down to the four forces that I am not willing. I'm willing myself, but that doesn't I don't consciously will my muscles to move a certain way or for my neurons to fire a certain way. Those are non-conscious processes. And we see that goal-directedness of self-flourishing or certain actions in plants, that acorns grow up to be oak trees and not other kinds of things. So we see this purposiveness in things, and it's universal. And it requires an explanation of an intelligent being. It cannot occur. Evolution cannot explain it simply by chance because the end is patterned and certain kinds of things move towards certain ends that affect their own self-flourishing. And Dan Barker cannot give an account of that. And we're saying the only thing that can give an account of that is, as Aquinas explains in what he calls his fifth way, in his proofs for the existence of God, is in final causality. And that is this notion of even before a thing comes to exist, like a house, it requires a blueprint in order for it to reach a certain goal of houseness. Before a dog exists, there are certain things at the very beginning that must be in place to accomplish that end. And it's beyond the dog's capacity to accomplish those, and they require an explanation. And we explain that that explanation must be an intelligent being that directs something from its beginning to fulfill its purpose according to its kind. And we as Christians happen to call that director God.
So how would we? I agree with you, but trying to figure out how would we bridge that gap between uh, just saying what you just said as far as the directedness of things needing God versus just the assertion that, well, Dan Barker's wrong. Evolution can account for that. Why can't evolution, just Darwinian evolution to be specific, why can't Darwinian evolution account for this kind of directedness? Is that a fair question?
Well, the most foundational is it can't explain how it started, because nothing can cause itself to be, because it doesn't exist to cause itself to be. So what's directing it? It has to be the thing before that, right? There's always one more thing before that. But when we get to the end of that, we see that the whole universe cannot be the ultimate cause of itself, because it too is a contingent kind of being that changes, that can undergo change. And so it can't be the cause of itself. So even if you took the whole universe, put your arms around it, it still requires an explanation outside of itself. Because if we want to go to the scientists, if we're going to hold that it's not eternal, and Aquinas would argue, even if it is eternal, it is still a contingent kind of thing and requires a cause to direct it toward its own end, a certain kind of patterned behavior. And one of the examples that Geisler and Turek give is the band playing. You know, the band is playing, but it wouldn't be playing at all if there wasn't a director of the band to begin with. The music stops, the band stops, everything stops. So we have to have a first cause, a directing cause, as well as a sustaining cause, moment by moment, for our continued existence. And that's an issue of contingency and change, as well as the issue of final causality. So the director is the one that makes the music start and keeps it going each second. And when the director stops, the music stops. There is no more. So that kind of a being is required for things that haven't existed forever, or even things that, let's say the universe were eternal, but it is still contingent. And it still would require a director directing it toward these certain patterned ends, because we can't do that of our own self. And evolution is a name that describes processes of changes from one species to another kind of species. It's not a mechanism that can explain how it all got started, or even how it can continue in a certain directedness pattern. Evolution can't do that.
Why do you think that as modern thinkers, at least, that we've abandoned this idea of final causality, this goal directedness? So it's interesting that Barker actually admits to at least some level of goal directedness, which is just survival, I think is what you said. But why have we largely abandoned this notion of final causality?
Well, I would love for Kyle to speak on this too, but I would say the general push by humans is to be the authority of themselves, to be their own final cause, and to be able to direct their own lives. That's the essence of our rebellion against our maker. So in order to do that, through the Enlightenment, 17th and 18th centuries, humanism, where the humans are on the throne of their own destiny, has arisen, and science has taken over this predominant category, to the point that many people believe that science is the only source of truth. And of course, that cannot be true, because science cannot define for itself. But we have to ask ourselves, how did science come about? And science can only be evaluated from outside science. You know, it can't explain itself, much less everything in the universe. So it requires an explanation. Why are there patterns? Why are all the presuppositions of science require that there be patterns, there be orderedness? But it can't cause the orderedness. It's just describing the orderedness that it sees and makes it able for us to do science. So the science itself requires an explanation outside of itself. And I think it's this love of science, because it gives us control and makes us think that we're God. And that's, after all, what we want to be. We want to be the boss of ourselves. And all the evidence is otherwise, we've put aside, and I think we've imbibed what is known as scientism, that science is the only source of truth. But then we ask ourselves, how do we know that's true about science? So Kyle, why don't you speak to this?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm trying not to laugh. I have a. I mean, I don't think the question is funny, but I have a philosophy friend here in town. He works at the classical school where my kids go, and he's not a Thomist, so we always have some good back and forth. But I joke that almost everything is any problem in modern philosophy is Rene Descartes' fault. But yeah, I mean, I actually thought about this whenever I was learning about Thomas Aquinas, learning about the more classical scholastic metaphysics. Going to SES, I struggled for a long time trying to get that metaphysical thought in my head, as far as the four causes and all that. And I think, at least in our culture, we don't believe. I mean, you can look at the history of philosophy and see that the modern philosophers in the modern turn, they just jettisoned final and formal causality, and thoughts have consequences. So Western philosophy ever since then, unless you have stayed in the scholastic tradition, they just don't talk about formal and final causality anymore. But now, today, if you go to a public school, like I did, I was raised in the public education system here in Texas. You don't learn about metaphysics. I mean, who does? Mm-hmm. But the thing is, you still are learning a worldview, and mainly what you know about the world is what you learn from science class. And in science class, you're basically going to be taught a mechanistic worldview, and you're going to think that what reality boils down to is fundamental particles and how they interact. And that's efficient causality, that's material causality, but that's it. That's all you think of. So it really is a struggle to, although we would argue formal and final causality are you can't get rid of them. They're like Fazer talks about, like Edward Fazer talks about Aristotle's revenge. Like, we can talk, even biologists, scientists, they'll use final causality in their language, but then they'll maybe turn around and deny that it's a thing. So I just think it's ingrained in our minds from going to public school and not learning about classical metaphysics. We're just all brought up to be atomists. We're all brought up to be mechanists as far as causation goes.
Yeah. And just, again, for our listeners and viewers, to connect the dots between this and some of the other topics we've covered on the show and some of the topics to come, this whole idea of final causality or goal-directedness, that just is the foundation for natural law theory, which has implications to so many things we've talked about on the show, from critical race theory to racism in general to abortion, homosexuality, gay marriage, transgenderism. All of these hot button issues essentially boil down to this whole idea of formal and final causality, the very two things that have been jettisoned largely in modern thinking. And Kyle, as you said, ideas have consequences, and we're reaping the nasty fruit of those ideas, unfortunately. So, Trisha, to close out here, I think it's pretty inescapable when you really stop and think about reality and are honest with yourself that there is this goal-directedness built into reality. But for us as humans, how can we help people see that it may not be a natural goal, but their ultimate goal-directedness is God, is this relationship with God? How can we help people bridge that gap and see that?
Well, the fact of goal-directedness exists, but it's not just any kind of goal-directedness. It's a kind of goal-directedness according to the kind of being that I am. And so we have to ask ourselves questions that I think that Barker doesn't ask. He says things like, well, you can make your own purpose in your life. Well, I want to ask him, why do I need to? what is it about me as a human that makes me seek certain things like relationship, wonder about why I'm here? I mean, God could have stopped with cats, or evolution could have stopped with cats, and
That would have been
they don't
hell,
ask
in
that
my opinion, but
question.
I'm just saying.
You see, so we do have some questions asked about why is this a feature of us at all? And he can't say, well, evolution just bred it into us, because as I said, evolution can't even explain how the whole thing got started to begin with. And so how do you explain from chemicals how we've gotten to the kind of being that desires relationship and wonders if there's an afterlife and if there's anything beyond me? The very fact of those questions should tell us something about who we are. And I think that whenever we lay down at night and think on it, that the only reasonable conclusion is I'm not the end of myself. There's an end beyond me. I seek the good. I can't do the good, but I seek the good. I seek my own self flourishing. I sometimes do it in unhealthy ways or wrong ways, but I seek that. We see all things do. What is the explanation of that, since it can't be from within the thing itself because it didn't exist to manufacture that? So I think that we can reach the conclusion of God out of not just the philosophical, dry argument, but just by the very nature of our being and the kinds of questions that we ask, that it at least warrants serious consideration of, is it most reasonable to think that this happened by accident, or that this desire for relationship, for meaning and purpose to my very being, these kinds of questions I ask, there is an answer, and the answer is outside of me. It's in a safe, unchangeable being who has already proved, no matter how much evil is in the world, has already proved with substantial force that he loves and cares for me by the very coming of his own son to pay for my sin in the flesh and to restore my relationship with this maker. I just think that we can at least get to the point of arguing, yeah, I think it's worth at least considering that this kind of being exists, and give it a fair thought and explore. Don't just rule it out because you say science doesn't allow for it. Science is quite limited in what it can do, and science is not the only source of truth. As William Lane Craig has pointed out, there are many things that we know to be true, such as math, that are not what we consider science proper. We're not doing the scientific method to know them. And so we need to ask ourselves these very deep questions about, why do I have these questions at all? Mm-hmm. And why is it that I know that the answer isn't just inside me, no matter what Buddhism says? Mm-hmm. Why is it in the deepest part of me? I know that I'm not God because I see how much I mess up. And what's the explanation of that messing up? And is there any hope for the resolution of that messing up that I keep doing despite the fact that I could? And these questions can be answered in the being through which our own being originated and is sustained moment by moment, since we're the kind of beings that could possibly not be. We have to have an explanation outside ourselves, and that explanation we call God.
That's beautiful. Thank you for that.
Oh,
and
go ahead,
Kyle. Yeah.
Do you mind if we have a couple more minutes? One of my favorite parts about Trisha's chapter was how she pointed out Barker's definition of, because I can't remember how he puts it, but he says something like you could go find your own meaning in life, but then he defines, what life is and purpose and all that. Trisha, can you explain kind of his definition of finding purpose and how there's some circularity in that? That's one of my favorite points that you bring up in your chapter.
It ends up being that he basically says, you seek to solve problems. That's how you find your purpose. You find a problem and you seek to solve it. That gives your life purpose. And in a way, he's talking there about a sense of fulfillment, a feeling, an existential quality, right? But he's also saying, no, the ultimate goal is to survive, because we know that evolution breeds into us to survive automatically. But then it ends up being you're surviving in order to survive. So is that it? I'm seeking to survive so that I can survive. If that's his full definition of purpose, and it's cut off there, then it's sort of discouraging, to say the least.
Yeah.
We're surviving. Why are you seeking to survive? So that you can survive more. And remember, it's not just so that I can survive more, because I'm going to be gone. I'll be dead and rotting in the ground, no more existing. But I'm seeking to survive for the sake of this nebulous species and whatever is existing beyond me. So it's not even a heritage that is eternal. I'm dead and gone because I have no afterlife. So what difference does it really make when you get down to it? His version, what difference? Who cares? He can give himself meaning. He can give himself a sense of fulfillment. But so what? It's illusory, because you're going to be dead and rotting in the ground, and that could occur next minute. There is nothing more. There's nothing outside of you for which you're working for, other than the existence for other things that are going to survive in themselves in order to survive. One big, you call that the circle of life? There you go. That's how fulfilling the circle of life.
Yeah, it really does boil down to a shuffling chairs on the Titanic scenario.
Yeah, it really does, and not encouraging in the least.
Yeah. And that's why I call it the journey to nowhere.
Yeah.
You see, he's finding purpose, but the journey he's on is not going anywhere. There is no ultimate. The ultimate is surviving in that moment until you don't anymore. That's it. And we're supposed to find that fulfilling. And we have to ask ourselves why we really don't find that fulfilling. I mean, we can stay busy and not think about it. I know millions of people who do that. We can make ourselves busy solving problems until we drop dead and aren't solving problems anymore. We can do that, and we can call that meaning, but that's just not good enough. Yeah. It's just not good enough for humans. It's good enough for animals, but it's not good enough for humans. And that's why we can argue for essentialism, that we are a distinct kind. We're not just more or better of something else. We're a distinct kind. We have essences. We're certain kinds of beings that ask these questions, and these questions come from somewhere. And they come from the heart of the one who made us and enabled us to ask them to begin with.
A distinct kind with a distinct purpose. Well, guys, thank you so much for sharing. Again, that we've been talking with Kyle Keltz and Trisha Scribner, the editors of Answering the Music Man, responding to Dan Barker's claims of atheism and his assertions against Christianity. And thank you to Terry, who posted on Facebook that he just ordered the book, and thank you for providing this resource for the church. So kudos to you guys for working on this project. And of course, you can find that on Amazon and anywhere books are sold. So guys, as we close out,
Adam?
Yes.
One quick question, one quick point.
Yes.
Make sure that your readers who dig into the book tune back into you next week, or for as long as you have people on that are contributors to explain it. It helps them flesh it out. It will give them context. And if they have questions, maybe they can post them to you and we can get back with them, that sort of thing, just so that they know they have support as they go through this, if they feel a little overwhelmed at some point.
Sure, absolutely. And we'll be having some of the other authors on next week, so be sure to catch that. But as we close out, guys, let our audience know how they can find out more about you individually, the work that you're doing, and learn more about you. So Trisha, where can they learn more about what you're doing?
Okay, TrishaScribner.com is TRICIA Scribner, SCRIBNER, as on the screen.com is my website, and it's lacking because I've been working on a dissertation, but I also am on Facebook and with Beyond the Basics, and EatSteakNotCake.com is a ministry that we are working with to provide more deeper topics, and we'll be doing a fall semester of attributes of God. People are welcome to join in. eatsteaknotcake.com. We'll have soon coming up there the listing of topics we'll be teaching for the fall, and hope to have more blogs coming out, as I said, on crossexamined.org and a few other places. So I look forward to interacting with people, Facebook or on Cross Examined and other locations online.
Excellent. How about you, Kyle?
Oh, I'm all over social media, but I don't get on there much. It's just to share things about my work. Mainly where people can find me is my academic website. It's bkylekeltz.com. It's BKYLEKELTZ.com. So that's where all my stuff is. I would like to let everybody know that if they do want to support the seminary, the Dan Barker book, Answering the Music Man, all the proceeds do go to SES. So that's a great way to get some good apologetic material, but also to support the seminary as well.
And thank you for that. You're very kind. All of you guys are very kind for doing that. So we really do appreciate it. And that's not why we have you on the show. We're interested in the material and the work that you're doing. But we really do appreciate that. Well, guys, this has been fun. Thank you for your time. And doctors, keep up the good work. We appreciate you guys.
All right, thank you for having me on.
Alrighty, well, that was again Kyle Keltz and Trisha Scribner, both SES alumni on the book they edited, Answering the Music Man. So I hope you enjoyed that, and be sure to check out their work, and be sure to check out the book. And as Kyle said, if you're interested in supporting the seminary, we can't do this sort of thing without your support, whether that be financially or prayerfully, whatever that looks like for you. You can visit ses.edu to learn more about those options. And as always, if you're interested in learning more about becoming a student, whether that's in a degree program, in a certificate program, auditing classes, whatever that may be in your journey, you can visit degrees.ses.edu/podcast, degrees.ses.edu/podcast. You can download a free ebook to learn more about the really unique integration of theology, philosophy, and apologetics that undergirds everything we do at SES, and how that can serve you in your ministry context, whether that's in the pastorate, as a homeschool mom, whatever that looks like for you. There's a way that you can be more equipped to proclaim the gospel, engage the culture, and defend the truth with the work that we're doing at SES. So I hope you will check that out. Again, we'll have some more authors of the book on the show next week, so please be sure to avail yourself of that. And as always, we call this show Why Do You Believe? And the only reason to believe anything is because it's true. So go share truth with someone today.
Providing an integrated approach to theology, philosophy, and apologetics that will equip you to proclaim the gospel, engage the culture, and defend the truth. That's SES.